The moniker worst video game ever made gets thrown around a lot, but a while back I heard someone make a case for Dora the Explorer Dora's World Adventure on the Game Boy Advance. A subjectively bad game for sure, which got me wondering, what would the developers think about people considering their game to be one of the worst ever made? This prompted me to look into the developers of said game, and what I found was actually somewhat interesting. So today I'm going to share with you some games and some history of a small developer, Black Lantern Studios, Inc. Immersive gaming gods, as their website's HTML title proclaims, Black Lantern Studios, or BLS, in addition to sharing an acronym with a pretty good metal band, was formed in 2003 by a small team of people and developed about 40 games since. Details about the company were a bit enigmatic at first. A quick Google search took me to their official website, which raised more questions than answers. The first thing I noticed were these images of characters all over the place. This background image is of these hamster-looking animals, which are called Zhu Zhu Pets. We also have this image, which has a few white pixels left over that really bothers me for some reason, but this image is of some Daga Door characters. Now don't worry if you've never heard of them, we'll talk more about them later. You can mouse over the image and click the little arrow to see some more IPs that they've worked on. The site's content looks like it was made with one of those free blogging site templates. All the posts are extremely generic video game articles. There's a Black Ops 3 emblem guide, some Minecraft server tips, an article about chronic back pain and gaming. Not really the type of stuff you'd expect to see from a developer's official website. The About section reveals a big piece to this puzzle. It tells us that Black Lantern split into 3 companies in 2008. Black Lantern Studios, Seamless Entertainment, and Graphite Lab. Seamless Entertainment doesn't have much to speak about, but Graphite Lab is pretty interesting. First of all, their website is really cool. I'm not usually a fan of the overly busy websites, but I can tell a lot of work was put into this. Right away, you can tell that they mostly have worked on licensed mobile games for children, which I guess it's easy money, but for such a fancy website, I was kind of expecting them to have made some better games. They boast over 200 games developed, but only recently have they released what seems to be their first and only original, Hive Jump, for the Switch, Xbox One, and PC. It actually looks pretty cool, like a Metroid/Contra thing with procedurally generated levels. They also developed Ben 10: The Rise of Hex for the Wii and the Xbox 360, which is an interesting outlier as they have no other games developed in the Ben 10 franchise or for non-mobile consoles, besides their only original, the aforementioned Hive Jump. But we're here to talk about games made by the company that would eventually become Graphite Lab, Black Lantern Studios. There's a lot to cover, so let's swoosh right in. One of the first games developed by BLS is surrounded by controversy. Elf Bowling was a free game originally released for Windows in 1998 by InStorm as promotional marketing content. The game was shared by people emailing each other the attached .exe file of the game, an unsafe practice at any time and pretty much unheard of today. Even back then, it was rumored that the game would release a virus on Christmas Day, which of course was just a rumor, but many people deleted their exe file of the game on the night of December 24th just to be safe. Not to say that there weren't fake or infected versions of the game going around, but despite the risks, this practice of unprotected file sharing contributed to the game's popularity. In fact, it became something of an internet sensation in 1999 and 2000. A sequel was also released in November of 2002. Several more sequels were also released later, and there are currently at least 8 official titles. In fact, this game was so popular a movie was made based on the series. BLS enters the picture in 2005 with the release of Elf Bowling 1 and 2 on the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS. This was a port of the original games in a 2-in-1 package. In Elf Bowling 1, it's more or less what you'd expect. You play as Santa, of course. The game is bowling, and the pins have been replaced by elves. These elves are full of turn-of-the-millennium tude, as it's been called, and will occasionally taunt Santa and/or make pop culture references familiar to that era.
Hey Santa.
It is a very simplistic game of reaction time with one-button controls. The graphics are, as you can see, pretty bad, and besides the occasional taunt or elf farting, there's very little in terms of sound effects and no music to speak of. But if Elf Bowling alone isn't exciting enough, this cartridge also contains a port of Elf Bowling 2, Elves in Paradise. Elf Bowling 2 might better be described as elf shuffleboarding. This is a forced 2-player game, and good luck finding another human who would actually be willing to play this with you. Thankfully, there's a computer that wasn't programmed to make good life choices. You could even just choose to play as 2 players and control both of them yourself. This might actually be more fun as you don't have to wait through the computer's turn, and you can try to get maybe a total high score, but that thinking's probably a little too progressive for this game's liking. Anyway, there are 3 rounds in which you take turns flinging an elf by its speedo across a ship's deck, trying to land them as close to the edge as possible without going over. More points are awarded for the further away the elves are, and at the end of each round, every elf that's standing in a point zone is totaled and the points are awarded respectively. This is still just a reaction-based one-button game, but you can employ a tiny bit of strategy here, or at least try to. Because points aren't awarded until the end of the turn, you can try to knock your opponent's elves off the ship, although this might result in knocking them into a better location or knocking your own elves off. There's also a meter that tells you which direction the ship is swaying, which can influence the curve of a thrown elf. The graphics are about the same as the first game. There's a few new taunts here, but again, not much else of the sound and no music. I actually kind of like this game. It's almost objectively better than Elf Bowling 1, but overall still quite mediocre. For comparison's sake, let's quickly look at the DS version. As you can see, it's more or less the same. The graphics are marginally better, but that's probably just due to a slightly higher resolution. There are a few extremely minor differences. In Elf Bowling 1, you now have a little chart in the top screen that shows the current pin layout and how many balls you have left in the round. In Elf Bowling 2, there are these penguins flying around in the sky. I've heard you can actually hit these little guys with elves for some extra points, but I was never able to. Other than that, everything is exactly the same. Same gameplay, same lack of music, same mediocrity. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a copy of the original Elf Bowling 1 that couldn't pass a simple virus total check. So here's some footage I found on YouTube that hopefully falls under fair use. Here we have a proper title screen with a bit of story. This is probably the most interesting part of the game. It's actually kind of amusing. Right away, we can see the original graphics were not so pixelated, more akin to the vector graphics of Flash games of the time. There is a split screen with a close-up of the elves on the right, similar to the second screen of the DS. We can also see more animation in the elves. They're smoking cigarettes, and there's random wildlife acting as obstacles to the bowling ball, whereas in these ports you can see wildlife off to the side, but they never interfere, at least not in my playthroughs. The chart on the DS version is also here, but other than the smoother animations and better graphics, the gameplay is the same. I actually did find a clean archived version of the original Elf Bowling 2. Again, it has a pretty humorous intro story in which we find out that player 2 is actually Santa's older brother, Dingle Kringle. There's an in-game tutorial here as well, which can be disabled. There are, of course, better graphics and animations, such as the blinking speedos of elves that multiply points. This mechanic exists in the ports, but not the blinking speedos. The penguins are here too, and overall I feel that the elves are more chatty and have a few more lines of speech to choose from. Even though I never actually played these games back in their heyday, it wasn't until I played this version that I understood the appeal. It's a simplistic time waster, easy to just pick up and play, and I can see how it might have been fun with 2 or more players. Nothing spectacular, but far, far better than what BLS would make of it 5 years later. And the critical reviews reflect that. Upon release, it received negative reception, and is often cited on worst video games of all time lists. But there were bigger issues than the game's quality, if you can believe it. This game was released without permission from the copyright and trademark owner. That person is, or at least was at the time, Matthew Lichtenwalter, who himself stated that these games were extremely poor copies of the code and art by the original creators, and I gotta say, I agree with Mr. Lichtenwalter. Now, I can't say for sure if BLS even knew that they didn't have permission. I feel like that's more the responsibility of the publishers, or maybe some other people who were involved in the game besides the developers. But either way, a situation like this is not something that you want to have your company associated with, especially just starting out. Fortunately for BLS, they survived this controversy, and went on to develop more games. Franchised media was kind of BLS's thing, even to this day as Graphite Lab, but this wasn't exclusive to the typical TV and movie franchises. BLS also worked on, among other things, toy franchises, one of those being Zhu Zhu Pets. Zhu Zhu Pets was a line of robotic hamster toys that exploded in popularity in late 2009. They were so popular, in fact, that around the holiday season, their price had been marked up to 60 USD from the retail of only 9, and BLS was there to capitalize on this popularity. The first in a series of atrocities was released in 2010 for the DS, iPhone, and PC. BLS handled the DS version, but before I talk about that, I want to talk about the PC version. When I was researching this game, I stumbled upon a bit of a mystery. When trying to find out the true developer of the PC version, which is wrongly attributed to BLS in most instances that I found online, I came upon Raptisoft. On their website, you can find a game called Hamster Ball that looks exactly like Zhu Zhu Pets for the PC, but with some minor tweaking. The title screen has changed a bit, though the credits are conspicuously absent from the Zhu Zhu version. Understandable, it's starting to look like a bit of a tricky topic. Here's a side-by-side of the two, or perhaps one, games. The level is exactly the same. Hamster Ball gives you an extremely generous countdown timer, while Zhu Zhu counts up, giving you a target goal time. Another small change is that these flags have been covered by the face of what looks like a generic cartoon hamster, but I guess you could call it a Zhu Zhu Pets hamster. The results screen has also been altered with Zhu Zhu art and actually seems to be a bit more in-depth. So it looks like the game Hamster Ball from 2005 was somehow obtained and reskinned and tweaked slightly 5 years later to be released as a Zhu Zhu Pets game. I apologize for that digression, but I thought it was an interesting enough discovery to share. Anyway, let's get to those BLS-developed Zhu Zhu Pets games. Zhu Zhu Pets for the DS is nothing like its PC counterpart. The game is comprised of two main parts. The first part is a kind of hub world. The main area of the hub world is where your pets will wander around, occasionally needing your attention to feed, water, even love them. This is done by either dragging them to the appropriate location or dragging the appropriate item to them. You navigate the hub world by dragging a pet to any of the circles on the floor representing the adjacent room. For example, when a pet is tired, you drag them to the circle at the bottom of the screen to enter the bedroom, then you drag them to a bed so they can sleep. The game will automatically send you back to the main room so you don't have to sit around waiting for them to wake up. It only takes a few seconds and the pet is fully rested and ready to go. The top screen keeps track of your pet's condition. There's a super enthusiastic narrator to help you along the way.
Drag a treat to your Zhu Zhu to make it especially happy and healthy.
From the hub world, you can access the second portion of the game, Adventure, as the game calls it. There are 6 rooms, each with several levels to choose from. You can choose any of your pets. There doesn't seem to be any difference stat-wise. These are levels in which you control your pet by tapping the screen, meaning I'm at a disadvantage being on emulator. The stages start out simple, but as you unlock more, they slowly become more complex. Some levels have a specific goal, such as collect a certain number of coins or stars, while others are simply a find the exit run. These levels can get divergent, and it's possible to permanently miss something if you pass it up or take the wrong path, meaning you'll have to play the level over if you want to collect everything. You can also unlock upgrades and more pets through progressing in these adventures. Typically, you'll run a level, then go back to the main area and care for your pet's needs, then run another level, then repeat. I didn't get super far into the game, but I imagine a full house of Zhu Zhus would be quite hectic to care for. I expected this game to be trash, and it somewhat surprised me, and while I can't recommend it, I can see how the intended demographic would probably really enjoy it, especially at the time. Zhu Zhu Pets 2 is extremely similar to the first game, but with a bit of refinement. This one starts out with a digitized cutscene and even has a bit of story to move the game along. There is far less emphasis on caring for your pets in this one and more focus on the adventure levels. In fact, even the first few levels themselves seem to have more thought put into them than the whole of the previous title. The narrator's back and even more enthusiastic than ever.
Meet the wild buds! They're a mischievous bunch of Zhu Zhus that live in the wilderness.
She has got to be one of the most enthusiastic, disembodied voices in video game history. You hear her a lot, and she is always at that same level of enthusiasm.
Let's take care of your Zhu Zhu pet. Tap and drag your Zhu Zhu pet on the screen to move it to different places.
I didn't get too far in this one, but I liked what I played. It's an improvement from the first game, definitely. Kung Zhu was an expansion of the toy line that was an attempt to make Zhu Zhu Pets marketable to boys. Because if there's one thing we boys like, it's kung fu fighting hamsters? This game is radically different from the first two, as it is a platformer. There's a bit of story here, something about some bad guys stealing the tablets of Zhu and using them to steal all the happiness from the Zhu-universe. At the beginning of the game, you select your favorite Zhu Zhu fighter and armor, and unlock the others as you progress. There are 4 zones, each with about 5 levels to play through, and you can go through each zone in any order. Each character plays mostly the same, but there are slight differences, such as attack speed and reach. The armor gives you more health and changes up your attack depending on which suit you're wearing. Each level has tons of stuff to collect. Aside from the usual health and power-ups, you can also find permanent health and suit upgrades. As for gameplay, well, it's an extremely easy platformer. None of the levels I played had any pitfalls, the platforming isn't challenging, and the combat, while not terrible, isn't super fun, and most of the time you can just mash the attack button without taking any damage. Probably the strongest point of this game is the level design. It's quite well done, but I feel like the lack of challenge brings it down slightly, as well as the bland graphics. They almost look pre-rendered at times, if the rendering was extremely simple. I like the sprite graphics, but the level graphics lack variety. Music and sound is also not bad. I ended up kind of liking this one. It's so-so, but there's more good than bad, if only a little bit. I would still recommend playing something else, though. Next came Zhu Zhu Princess, and there's not much to say about this one. It's almost the same as the first game, but now that the boys have their own Zhu Zhu Pets, they've focused completely on girls for this game. It is now a princess adventure, and you can now dress up your pets. The toilet room has been replaced with a makeup vanity room, probably a good call, and if you really like the first one, you might like this. There are all new adventure levels, but this one is more or less a clone of the first game with some slight changes. Here's Quest for Zhu. This game was released alongside the direct-DVD movie of the same name. The game begins with, I guess, a summary of the movie using still images taken from that movie. Much less enthusiasm by the narrator here, and I'm disappointed already.
Pipsqueak, they were all hamsters who were in search of something.
But the disappointment is just beginning. What the kind of graphics are these? I don't even know what to say. It sucks. Is this a pre-rendered 3D sprite from the movie? It looks so out of place in the 2D level. And the level itself is so ugly. Everything is flat and the colors are drab. Like, what the is that? A log of shit? And worst of all, every 5 seconds the game is stopping my movement completely and telling me how to jump or move left.
Test your jumping skills. Press the B button to jump. There are lots of coins scattered across each level. Collect as many as you can. You can use gems to play minigames later on. Pick them up so you can use them later.
Was this game made for complete morons? Because I feel like if you're old enough to understand what she's saying, you're old enough to figure out how to do those things on your own, and if you're not, then you're probably too young to actually play the game and get more enjoyment out of just randomly hitting buttons or chewing on the DS. But what do I know? Maybe I'm just mad that the narrator has lost some of her enthusiasm, but I guess this game can do that to a person. Anyway, I pushed through the first few levels, and guess what? I actually found some redeeming qualities about this game. Despite the absolutely horrendous graphics, BLS once again shows that they know good level design. Or maybe I'm just easily impressed? But the music and the sounds are also actually pretty good. It's a shame because I think with some better graphics and a little more time, this could have been a great game. Instead, we have another forgettable platformer. Does this game really need to exist? Did this movie even need to be made? Probably not. And that's it for the Zhu Zhu franchise. There's a lot more to the Zhu Zhu Pets story. The information is out there if you're interested, but I'm getting kind of tired of Zhu Zhu Pets, so let's just move on. Let's look at yet another forgotten franchise related to BLS, Moshi Monsters. This time we're not talking about a toy franchise. Moshi Monsters was a browser-based flash game that launched in 2008 by Mind Candy, in which players would create and customize their very own monster, known as a Moshling in the Moshi Monsters lore, then use said Moshlings to play in several mini-games. At first glance, it kind of looks like Gaia Online meets CandyStand.com and possibly inspired by Club Penguin or similar games. The game was online until December of 2019, shutting down facing the impending official discontinuation of Flash Player. And though I've never heard of this game before looking into BLS, it had attained worldwide popularity, boasting over 80 million registered users in over 150 countries. There were several video games released for the series, and even a Moshi Monster movie. Now that it's gone, the Moshi Monsters website redirects you to moshysleep.com, It seems the Moshi franchise has been repurposed into a children's bedtime story app. The app gives you access to a library of audio files in which a story from the Moshling universe is narrated in a calming tone while music plays. It has been specifically designed to relax and soothe. Their website states that they've put in research and effort to make the audio maximally sleep-inducing, using technologies such as low-frequency theta oscillations and including ambient background white noise, and even the narration itself becomes more sleepy as it progresses. I mean, they even got Sir Patrick Stewart in on this. That alone almost makes me want to try this app myself.
Friends, Moshlings, sleepy heads, lend me your ears.
But back to the Moshi Monsters that was. There were 3 games released on the Nintendo DS, Moshling Zoo, Moshlings Theme Park, and Katsuma Unleashed. Even though most online sources credit BLS with a 3DS version of Katsuma Unleashed, they did not work on either version, at least from what I can tell. They did, however, develop the other 2 games, Moshling Zoo and Moshling Theme Park. First, let's look at Moshling Zoo. As we know, BLS has had some experience with digital pet care type games. There are 3 main sections of the game. The first is the Woolly Wilderness. This is where you go to find new Moshlings. Next is the Moshling Zoo, where you can view and interact with all the Moshlings you've found so far. And finally is Monstro City, where you can buy items for your Moshlings. There are 8 levels to choose from in the Woolly Wilderness. You can visit any level at any time, and each level has a set amount of both Moshlings and Moshling eggs, which are hidden within. Each level consists of scrolling left and right, and tapping on items to complete simple puzzles, which will in turn cause Moshlings to appear. For example, in the first level there's a banjo with a broken string. You tap on this string that's conveniently sitting right next to the banjo, put it in your inventory, then open your inventory, drop it onto the banjo to fix it, and then this Moshling pops up because I guess it loves banjos or bluegrass music or something, and it decides to join you and you add it to your collection. Sometimes you'll have to do multiple things until a Moshling is satisfied enough to join you, but usually everything you need is right there in the level next to the Moshling. Most of these are pretty simple, but you'll need to do some work to collect every Moshling. Sometimes you'll need to go into town to buy certain items to solve specific puzzles and stages. There are gems that you can tap on called rocks, and this is the game's currency. Sometimes you can find Moshlings just hanging out, but you need to feed them the right kind of food or else they'll run away, and you'll have to exit the level and come back. To that effect, there's a helpful Monsterpedia that you can bring up at any time while in a level. It has entries for every obtainable Moshling in the game, and can help you by offering info on what types of food a Moshling prefers. And while they're not super in-depth descriptions, I found them somewhat interesting, and it really adds a lot to the game. Think of it as kind of like a Pokédex for Moshlings. In the Moshling Zoo section, your Moshlings are separated by type, and you can visit each type's house. You can buy furnishings for each house in the store as well. You can play a total of 5 minigames by tapping on a Moshling. Each Moshling has individual levels, which go up the more you play the minigames. The first minigame is a simple food prep game that I suck at, and I'm going to blame the fact that I'm using a mouse instead of a stylus as my excuse. Next is a similar in style game where you have to give your Moshlings a bath, using the right items in the right order as they appear, and it's f***ing adorable. Now, I only captured 3 Moshlings at the time I played these games, so I only had a total of 3 to feed and bathe, but I assume if you had more Moshlings, there are more to handle and thus more of a challenge. The third minigame is a series of simple number and geometry questions, kind of like a WarioWare quiz with simple math problems and shape matching. They get slightly more difficult as you progress, but never insanely mind-bending, though perhaps if you level up your Moshi a lot they do. The fourth minigame is a kind of race, where you control a single Moshi who automatically runs, but will jump when you tap the screen. You can collect floating rocks as you go, but there are obstacles to avoid. If you hit anything, you'll be stunned for a few seconds. And the last minigame is a marathon of 3 of the other minigames in which you compete against 2 other computer-controlled Moshlings. I only did this once, but I think the 3 games are randomly selected. I got the food, racing, and quiz game, although this quiz game was slightly different, with a different look and questions with a slightly different theme. I actually ended up liking this game a lot more than I thought I would. While the gameplay isn't spectacular and the franchise doesn't exactly appeal to me, this game is actually pretty well fleshed out. My biggest issue is just a minor one. There's no music in the Woolly Wilderness levels. Not that the music is anything great by itself, but there's music everywhere else. I wonder why not here of all places. Oh well, Next up is Moshlings Theme Park. The intro story tells us that looking after the zoo from the previous game is too tiring, and the Moshlings decide to take a vacation to the Moshlings Theme Park. We're immediately thrown into a minigame, and spoilers, there's a lot of them. Our Moshlings plane crashes, but thankfully everyone is okay, and everyone lands safely at the theme park. There are 6 areas in the theme park, each has a linear path to traverse, dotted with several points of interest to interact with. You must complete each of these points to unlock the next one. Think of a kind of Mario-style overworld, except in a straight line. These buildings can be one of several different types. 5 of the buildings are plots upon which you can build one of the minigames as an attraction for the theme park, and this way you have a bit of choice over which minigames you want to place where. However, you can only place them when you have enough rocks to fund the construction, and your choices are limited to 5 minigames total, and each can only be placed once. Once you build the minigame, you can play it, and each minigame has a tutorial to teach you how to play and give you tips on how to get high scores. At the end of a game, you can win a medal and a prize if you did well enough. Prizes are rewarded at different scores, so for example, prize 1 would be rewarded at a score of 1000, prize 2 at a score of 2000, and so on, but you can only get 1 prize per attempt, so if you want to collect all 5 prizes, you'll have to play each minigame at least 5 times. The first prize is always a keyring, which is required to progress the game, so at minimum you'll have to play each game at least once. Other prizes include rocks, items, and moshling eggs. Besides the minigame construction plots, there are rescue regions. This is where you go to find new moshlings and add them to your collection. You have to lead the moshlings through the level by clearing the path using things like cranes and switches and whistling for them. I didn't really care for these parts. They're really slow paced and you can only catch 1 moshling at a time, and when you do, all the stage obstacles reset and you have to clear everything again for the next moshi. There are other buildings, such as habitats, where previously rescued moshis will hang out. You can play a few other minigames here, kind of like in the last game, though not nearly as good. There's another cooking game, and this time around I'm much better at this one. There's also another bath time game, and again, it's f***ing adorable. What is it about bathing moshlis that is so unbearably cute? When they're all sudsy, they climb up to a little dunking booth, and you have to dunk them into the water. Then, using the underutilized DS's microphone feature, you have to blow them dry and they look so happy, and it's cuteness overload. Finally, there's Moshling Dash. Just like the last game, they run automatically, and you have to do a series of tasks to clear the path of obstacles, such as scribbling with a stylus or blowing into the microphone. You can also just play with your moshis here, giving them treats or toys to play with. So, while this game isn't terrible, it's extremely slow-paced and repetitive. I realized about halfway through World 2 that it was almost exactly the same as World 1. The minigames, the building order, the rescue missions, all the same with maybe a slight variation here and there, and a different theme. So overall, I'm unimpressed with the Moshi franchise on DS. Again, I never played the original browser-based game, but I feel like the franchise would have worked better as a cartoon show. Then again, judging by how well the movie was received, I'm not so sure. GoGo's Crazy Bones was a collectible figurine line of toys that was popular in the late 1990s through the 2000s. There were hundreds of individual pieces of varying rarity, each with their own name and design. These figurines could also be used for a variety of different games, such as throwing them on the ground and scoring points depending on how they landed, or trying to knock an opponent's GoGo Crazy Bones out of a circle. It's kind of like jacks or marbles. Perhaps the name Crazy Bones itself is a nod to the origin of jacks, which was originally called knuckle bones and was played with the ankle bones of hooved animals in ancient times. These games, of course, caused wear and tear on the toys and thus were not recommended for serious collectors. Fortunately for the world, a GoGo's Crazy Bones movie was never made. However, a video game was made, and for that, we can thank BLS. Unfortunately, this game is pretty terrible. There are 5 worlds, each with 5 levels, and each level has 3 games. Levels are selected through an extremely bland menu system. Each of the 3 games in each level is the same. You have a battle, basket, and knockout game. In each of these games, you first pick a team of 5 GoGos, each with its own stats and special abilities, such as the ability to drop straight to the ground or get a slight boost of speed whilst in midair. The object of each game is similar. You'll launch each GoGo from a platform one by one in an attempt to complete a goal. The goal in battle is to destroy the other GoGos by launching yourself into their surrounding platforms and crushing them or hitting them directly. You know what, it's easier just to say it's basically Angry Birds. This is Angry Birds. In Basket, the second game, your goal is to launch your GoGos into a basket. Yawn. The last game is Knockout, in which you simply have to knock the opposing GoGos out of their safe zone. You receive stars based on how well you did, and I think after at least 1 star in a level, the next level unlocks, and after unlocking all levels, the next world unlocks. But I didn't really get that far. This game is not fun at all. Sometimes the game can be frustrating, the physics are bad to begin with, and the fact that you have to select 5 GoGos with different stats makes it hard to get used to how the launching actually works if you can launch from the same angle at the same power, but get different results every time for every GoGo. Other times you make the perfect shot by accident, and while this feels nice, it doesn't really make me feel like I learned or accomplished anything. But overall the gameplay is just not enough to hook me in. Not to mention the graphics are abysmal and the music is below average. Just a really subpar effort all around. I was interested in finding out if the levels got more interesting or varied, but I just couldn't get into this game. I didn't want to play much after the first few levels. I tried to find a level unlock cheat or something like that online, but I couldn't. So I guess I'll never know. But also, I don't really care. Finally, we have Daga Door. These are plastic balls with solid steel cores. They're basically ball bearings wrapped in rubber. I guess kids will buy anything, or at least their parents will. The balls were collectibles with over 100 different balls to collect. You could also buy accessories such as the battle tracks that remind me of Hot Wheels tracks, and launchers and things of that nature. You can, of course, still find many of these toys on Amazon or eBay. There were also some promotional mini webisodes made, and they're interesting. These toys were manufactured by the same company behind Zhu Zhu Pets. Unlike Zhu Zhu's, however, Daga Door seems to have been completely dropped. The official website is now defunct, save for a brief mention on the manufacturer's website, and from what I can gather, there also seems like there was an attempt to reboot interest in Daga Door in 2011, but it looks like it didn't succeed. And of course, when the world needed a Daga Door video game, BLS was there to answer the call. This is a racing game, and right away it kind of reminds me of a mixture of early Sonic games and Uniracers on the SNES. You race against one other Daga Door on a track. The game is pretty difficult. The controls are simple to learn, but the AI is downright punishing. If you make one little mistake, you're most likely going to lose a race. When you're in the lead, the opponent is always right on your tail, and when you're behind, you only seem to slip further and further behind. Oh, and I'm only talking about the novice level practice races. Of course, it could be that Zhu Zhu Pets and Moshi games have softened me up a bit, or the fact that I suck at games in general, but I was only able to win one race out of the several that I attempted. Now I know some people get excited about getting their ass handed to them in a game and look forward to the challenge of overcoming it, but for a game like this, where it already doesn't have a lot going for it with so-so graphics and meh gameplay, it can't just also straight up kick my ass from the get-go. I don't feel like this game would be a rewarding enough investment of my time to master each track. Now, there are actually some genuinely fun moments when you're neck and neck with your opponent, which is practically always if you're doing well, and everything is speeding along lightning fast, but also the speed can sometimes hinder the experience. It's easy to jump at the wrong time or make a slightly wrong turn. One of these simple mistakes, just one, can cost a few seconds, and that, of course, can cost you the entire race. I think if the AI wasn't so ridiculously good right from the start, I would be more inclined to play this game more. But then again, maybe I'm just a noob complaining that this game sucks because it's too hard. Or maybe I've just played too many of these crappy games and I'm ready for it to end. Either way, I didn't like this game and I didn't play much of it. I think I would have had a better time playing with the actual toys. And that is Black Lantern Studios Inc. Kind of a mixed bag, definitely not top tier stuff, but it's not all bad. They were developing at a time when Flash games were still pretty popular, and you could definitely see the Flash game influence in a lot of their work. Unfortunately, this didn't translate well to consoles. Perhaps they would have found more success as an actual Flash game developer? But BLS did lead to Graphite Lab, which looks promising, and Hive Jump actually looks pretty cool. I'd like to see more originals from them. Maybe we'll focus on Graphite Lab in a later video. But that's all for this time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Boss Raid.